He didn't even shiver. He just sat there, while the suffocating heat rose off the concrete, as if someone had told him to stay put and never come back. He looked about 4 months old. Thin yellow cream fur clung to his gaunt frame, and his paws were drawn tight against the bottom chain link of the gate. He did not bark. He did not cry. He merely tilted his small body towards the outside world, waiting for a set of footsteps that would never arrive. I was nearly past him, arms full of a stack of food dishes and garbage bags. I shifted the dishes to one arm. He didn't flinch. The blindfold cloth was not torn or soiled. It was tied flat and hard at the back of his skull. Underneath one front paw was a crumpled piece of paper, its edges pressed into the dirt by the dog's weight. He didn't guard the paper, didn't twitch, and made no effort to escape. He just sat, listening to the sound of the door opening, the click of the latch, and the unsettled echo of the other rescues desperately trying to be heard. I've seen a lot of dogs come to this gate, but this dog's silence was heavier than any distant howl. It was as if he had realized that nothing good ever came after a sound. There was no leash. His thin collar was frayed at the buckle holes. I knelt beside him and offered my palm, facing up, between us. No touch. I hovered my fingers near his chest, letting him smell the metal and the other dogs on my skin. I kept my voice low when I spoke. "Come on," I whispered. "Come here. Good boy." He didn't turn his head. He didn't lean toward me. He didn't move at all. Even when I whispered "good boy," and that, more than anything else I had seen in this place, terrified me. The writing on the paper looked like someone had drawn it while crying. I slid my fingers under his paw, slowly, giving him time to pull away if he hated it. He didn't. His toes stayed pressed into the paper as if it was the last thing keeping him tied to the spot. Gently, I lifted his paw and pulled the note free. The paper was damp with sweat, or tears, or both. It had been crumpled and folded many times. Written, then hidden, then pulled out again when someone had finally given up. "This dog never had a home," the note read. "Only parking lots, motel nights, and the back seat of a car. He is afraid when doors close. Please, don't take the blindfold off until his heart stops waiting for me. He is a very good boy. Please tell him I tried." I stared at the words until they blurred. This was not the common, thin lie you found when people abandoned a dog. These were the words of a human who had little to offer this lost pup beyond a passenger seat, an old blanket, and a promise they couldn't keep. No yard, no kids, no family dinner. Just one human always moving, and one small body trying desperately to keep up. I folded the paper, put it in my pocket, and slid one hand under his chest and the other under his hind legs. He was lighter than he looked. As I lifted him, his whole body seized, his feet pushing toward the ground, his muscles rigid. As if the concrete under that gate was more important than anything I could give him. "It's okay," I whispered, but I wasn't sure that it was. He didn't cling to me. He didn't fight. He just tried to keep his body as close to the place where he was abandoned as gravity would allow. I carried him, the blindfold still on, through the doors. The sound of the other dogs grew and diminished around us. Standing in the middle of the shelter, holding this small, blindfolded body in my arms, and with the paper in my pocket burning hot, I realized I was faced with a choice: honor the words of the failed human, or show this dog the room where his life might actually begin. I had worked at this shelter for 10 years, but I had never been so afraid of the simple act of untying a knot. I decided to tell him the truth before showing him the world. I carried him to a back, quiet room, a room with soft light and a door that truly blocked the noise. No barking, no clanging metal. Just the low hum of the old ventilation and the gentle breathing of the dog against my chest. I sat on the floor with him and gently placed him in my lap, his back leaning against my stomach, his legs folded small. For a while, I just held him, feeling this lost dog trying to occupy the smallest space possible. "I am here," I said softly. "I am not the person who left you. I am the one who will be here when you finally understand that they are not coming back." I had heard all the variations of "I had no other choice" from people who left dogs at our door. Still, I clenched my jaw. But in the tone of this note, I could feel the owner's desperation, living in a car with a growing Malamute puppy, with no answers left. My fingers found the knot at the back of his head. The moment I touched it, his whole body stiffened. His breathing became shallow and thin, as if bracing for a blow that never came. "It's okay," I whispered. "It's only me." Slowly, carefully, I loosened the knot. The cloth slid off his fur, over his muzzle, and dropped into my hand. His eyes blinked in the light. Large, pale, with circles red from strain and exhaustion. There was no anger, no fight, only confusion, as if all the furniture in the room had been moved. He didn't look up at me. His gaze was fixed straight ahead, on the place where the asphalt, the footsteps, and the car door had once been his whole world. And then, for the first time, he made a sound. Not a bark or a cry, a high, broken whimper mixed with ragged breathing, as if he had tried to call a name and swallowed it halfway through. I felt the muscles under my hand contract. Slowly, trembling, he pushed against my arms and tried to stand. His nose was already aimed at the closed door leading outside. He wasn't looking for me, or the food dish. He was looking for the exit. Some dogs are afraid of the shelter. This dog was afraid of everything except the shelter. After that first step toward the door, I picked him up again and carried him down the hall for his procedure. He didn't fight, but held his body small and rigid, as if silence and surrendering to the world was the safest thing. On the examination table, he stood only because I was holding him up. No microchip, no tag with a phone number. Just a thin neck, light ribs, and dust-covered fur with small scrapes, marks of having been through places a dog should never have to traverse. The vet traced his spine, his legs, and his jaw with practiced hands. No obvious breaks or open wounds. Heart rate too fast. Body too thin. Dehydrated, stressed, and the marks of the road etched into every strand of his cream fur. He's trying desperately to hold it together, the vet said quietly. The body is fine, for now. It's the heart I'm worried about. We set him up in a small kennel away from the loudest barkers. A dish of clean water. A soft blanket, still warm from the dryer. I put him inside and latched the door with a click. He didn't walk around. He didn't sniff. He walked straight ahead and sat by the wire front, recreating his stance at the gate, motionless again. Noses poked out from the kennels on either side. A few dogs barked, one high and anxious, one low and frustrated. He didn't respond. He didn't growl or even glance at them. It was as if someone had reached inside this small lost dog and turned off a switch. I had seen angry dogs and trembling dogs. Dogs that slammed their bodies against the door until their paws bled. But this was different. This was a puppy who had used up all the words he had. I kept telling myself I was a veteran. That the years here had built a thick skin over all the vulnerable places. Then a dog like this showed up, and I felt that armor peel away like cheap paint. That night, I stayed late, working on paperwork that didn't really need finishing. On my way out, I walked past his kennel. He was sitting right by the door, his nose nearly touching the gap underneath, his eyes fixed on the thin stripe of darkness outside the kennel. His ears would twitch at every sound in the hallway, and droop again when he knew it wasn't the sound he wanted to hear. He wasn't sleeping. He was counting the footsteps that would never arrive. The next morning, I came in early, before the chorus of barks began, determined to find out if he was waiting for a human or a place. His kennel looked exactly as I had left it. The blanket barely disturbed. The cream fur pressed against the front, his eyes locked on the thin space under the door. I opened the kennel latch and pushed the door open, then stepped back. No treats, no leash, no gentle words. Just space, and a choice. At first, he didn't move. His gaze was still fixed on the gap as if the wire was still there. Then, slowly, he rose. I could see every bone under his fur shift as he redistributed his weight. He came to the entryway and stopped, nose down, sniffing the seam between the kennel and the hallway, the smell of disinfectant, the smell of anxiety, and the trace of hundreds of other paw prints. If he was going to go for someone, this was the moment. I was only a few feet away. I didn't call his name, didn't tap my feet, didn't make this my problem. He turned. Not toward me, but toward the long hallway leading to the front. With the same cautious determination, he moved, one step after another, following a map that only he could see. Halfway down the hall, I walked beside him, one hand ready. When he reached the outside door, he stopped, lifted his nose, and caught the draft. His body tilted forward. Everything about him was saying, that way. I gently put my arm around his chest, stopping him before he charged the glass. He didn't panic. He just stood there, the full weight of this small, lost dog tilted away from me and toward the world he knew. I understood then. He wasn't attached to a person. He was attached to the trajectory of his life, a single line that always ended at a gate. We went back together. On the way back to the kennel, twice, he politely tried to turn forward again. Not frantic, not wild, just stubbornly, like a compass refusing to reset. Back in the kennel, I latched the door, lingered longer than necessary, and looked at him, the soft cream fur and the tired eyes. A name came to me, before I could stop myself. Amber, I whispered, almost silently. One ear twitched halfway, catching the sound, but his eyes were back to the door. The first sign of hope didn't sound like a bark. It sounded like a sigh. The next few days settled into a rhythm he neither requested nor ever fought. Morning food. The blanket smoothed flat. And always, after only a slight delay, as if pulled by an invisible thread, he returned to his spot in front of the door. I tried things that might hold him. Soft toys saved for the smallest strays. Old leashes that faintly held the scent of other dogs who had moved on from here. An old t-shirt I placed beside his blanket, hoping my smell would become something stable in his drifting world. He ignored it all. Not out of fear, but out of indifference, as if the only reality he recognized was the space between himself and the door. One afternoon, I sat on the floor next to his kennel. I was too tired to offer any more clever suggestions. He didn't look at me. Still facing that narrow gap, waiting for the footsteps he alone believed were real. At some point, my hand slipped lower than usual, resting on his chest, not his shoulder. A light contact, held for just a few seconds longer. That's when it happened. He took a long, shuddering breath, the breath an animal makes when something internal, held rigid for too long, finally releases. And so subtly, he leaned in. Not fully, not with trust, but just a fraction of his weight shifted toward my knee, his flank grazing my arm. Half his face was still aimed at the door, as if he didn't want to admit the choice he was making. I froze. I didn't move my hand, didn't try to pet him, or ruin the moment by making it more than it needed to be. He was there, breathing slowly and carefully, accepting the warmth without giving up his watch. That night, I stayed again until after closing. Sitting on the floor next to his kennel, I talked about the other dogs, like talking about neighbors I hadn't met yet. Not to cheer him up, but just to let him know the world was wider than one doorway and one memory. When I finally stood to leave, my key ring slipped from my pocket and hit the concrete floor with a dry, metallic sound, a sound too familiar, too close to the gate in his mind. He sprang. Not with fear or curiosity, but impulse, a quick first step across the kennel, ears up, body aimed straight at the sound. He didn't run to me. He ran to a sound that felt like a chance. We thought he was ready to go home. He disagreed. Weeks of slow daily care did all they could. His hips plumped out, his ribs filled in under the cream fur. He started eating with what could be called appetite, not obligation, emptying the dish and licking the edges, as if food was allowed to taste good again. Sometimes, as I approached with his dish, his tail would give a tiny, hesitant wag against the blanket. It wasn't joy, but a reflex his body had forgotten to turn off. And then they came. Looking not for a playful puppy, but for a dog to save from a kennel. They stopped in front of his wire, and everything about them was quiet. Yellow fur, calm eyes that observed everything and committed to nothing. He had the kind of face people fall in love with before they understand the story behind it. They said all the right things. We've adopted before. We understand timid dogs. We want to give him a chance. The shelter was full, and I felt the weight of every ticking clock pressing down on the decision. Part of me wanted to say no, to keep him under my watch for a bit longer. But another part knew that a kennel door, no matter how gently opened, was not where a young dog should live. I signed the papers. They signed. When I clipped the leash to his collar and let him out, he walked gently and quietly beside me. At the front door, he did something he had never done before. He looked back. Not at me, but at the building, at the door he had stared at for hours from the inside. They put him in the car, thanked us, and drove away. I stood there longer than necessary, staring down the road, listening to the silence he left behind. That night, long after closing, I went out to take the trash. The parking lot was mostly dark, the gate a silhouette against the streetlights. He was there. Sitting alone in front of the shelter. No car, no leash, no crumpled paper at his feet. This time, he had walked back by himself to the only place that had ever treated him as if he belonged. This time, he wasn't waiting, he was giving up. As I approached, I could see thin red lines on his feet, and dirt matted into his cream fur, as if he had dragged himself back here, rubbing his body against gravel and concrete. No collar tags, no note, no card disappearing into the darkness. My phone was silent, no missed calls, no it didn't work out voicemail. Nothing from the people who had signed the papers, smiled, and promised they understood timid dogs. They had driven off with a fragile little soul and somehow decided it wasn't a story they needed to finish. We took him back inside. The first time he walked through these doors, he sat rigid, eyes fixed, every muscle tensed in anticipation. Now, as I put him on the blanket, he immediately lay down, resting his head on his paws, his eyes open but vacant, as if there was nothing left worth focusing on ahead. In the days that followed, his dish came back full more often than not. He ate, but only to sustain himself, pecking at the food like a chore. He no longer rushed to the front of the kennel or watched the gap under the door. He lay slightly sideways, as if all the roads he remembered led to the same dead end. I played the memory over and over in my head. We had adopted out a dog built on thin, trembling promises, given it one more promise, and watched it collapse under his head. Standing there, listening to him not move, not ask, not hope, I made myself a promise I truly intended to keep. If we failed him on human selection one more time, we wouldn't just lose his body. We would lose him from the inside. A dog's true name isn't given by a human. It chooses it, at the moment it decides to live. After his second stay, I stopped thinking of him as the number in the kennel and started thinking of him as the question that hadn't been answered yet. We started taking him out to the shelter's small exercise yard. A gentle walk. A slow circle around the building. Always on a loose leash, and always ending at that front gate he knew too well. At first, he just followed along, quiet and resigned. His feet moved because mine moved. But as time passed, his nose started working harder. He paused at patches of grass, at poles, at corners where other dogs had left their biographies. Still quiet, still cautious, but at least the world was starting to take shape again. On the third or fourth day of these outings, I noticed something. Every loop, just before reaching the gate, he stopped. Not at the fence itself, but at the sign next to it. He stood there, statue-like, tracing the outline of the paint and the metal ring in his mind, as if carving it onto whatever map he possessed. One afternoon, we stood there together. The sun set, making his cream fur glow, staring at the place that had captured this small Malamute puppy twice. I knelt beside him, my joints cracking more than I cared to admit, and gently placed one hand on his side. "If this is the place you keep coming back to," I whispered, "if this is your starting line, you deserve a name you can call your own." I tried a few names. Old favorites. Names I'd heard 100 times. None of them stuck. They slid away like water. And then one came, as fragile and bright as the way he looked. "Amber," I said. For a moment, nothing happened. Then, he shifted his weight just enough to break the pattern. One step away from the sign. One step away from the gate. Toward me. It was such a small movement, you would miss it if you weren't looking. But I was looking. For the first time since he was left, he chose the human over the door. From that moment on, Amber was no longer just another puppy in the shelter. He ran to the gate again, but this time, not to wait. In the weeks that followed, Amber started moving like a young dog, not a shadow. He'd secretly tow an old tug-of-war toy, and if he thought I wasn't looking, he'd pounce on it, pretending to be uninterested. In the yard, he'd take short, clumsy dashes, as if remembering what it felt like to be light. The door still mattered to him, but it wasn't the only thing. One afternoon, a woman came in. Not alone, but with a white, grizzled older dog by her side, a leash held in a hand practiced in handling them. She wasn't looking for the perfect puppy. She was looking for a dog that needed patience. She spoke slowly, gently, using words like we have experience with this before. No fairy tales, just experience. I spoke with her longer than I probably had with any adopter before. I asked the hard questions, the ones that make people squirm in their chairs. What if he shuts down? What if he runs to the door and tries to leave? What if he doesn't love you back right away? The woman didn't flinch. She just nodded, answering like someone who had navigated the worst for another broken dog. When the day came for them to meet, I leashed Amber and walked him to the lobby. His feet remembered the path. The moment he caught sight of the gate's outline, his pace quickened, old habit. The woman and her elderly rescue dog walked in. Amber stopped dead. His body tilted toward the exit, as always, but his eyes were different. For the first time, he looked not past the door, but at me, as if asking a question I could actually answer. I didn't call his name. I didn't pull the leash. I just opened the space and waited. Amber ran. My chest tightened for a second, anticipating him freezing at the doorway like before. But he didn't. He passed the gate without a glance, heading straight for the older dog. He used his nose, and his tail, low but steady, began to wag. In that moment, I understood. The shelter was no longer his last hope. It had finally become the bridge to a place he could call home. I thought he would forget us. But I learned that some dogs never forget the gate where they were saved. Amber left the shelter, already in the back seat of a car that smelled of another elderly rescue and well-worn blankets. No balloons, no grand speeches, just a careful hand on his collar and the sturdy shadow of the dog beside him, showing him the way towards something other than loss. The first picture arrived a few days later. Amber was curled up on a small rug near the front door, his paws folded under his chest, his eyes half open, but aimed at the place where people came and went. This time, his door didn't open onto a parking lot. It opened onto a hallway, a kitchen, and a life. And on the other side were footsteps that left, and more importantly, footsteps that came back. Weeks passed. New picture. Amber stretched out on a sofa, one paw resting on the back of the older dog, as if an unspoken pact had been made. His eyes were softer. His body finally occupying more space than just a corner of the floor by a doorway. Sometimes, a message arrived from his adopter. He still likes to nap by the door sometimes, she wrote. As if he's just checking that the world is still where he left it. Months later, they drove into our parking lot to visit. When I walked outside, Amber jumped out of the car. His head was up. He saw the gate, the sign, and the building. His tail started to wag, slowly, nostalgically. He walked straight toward the gate again, but this time, he didn't sit down and shut his heart. He walked right through it, like someone returning to the place they survived, not the place they were abandoned. The kennel dogs erupted in barks. He didn't flinch. He walked past each kennel with a calm, knowing look, as if telling the other dogs, I know. I was there, too. When he came to me, he didn't hesitate. He leaned his small chest against my legs and then, once, jumped up awkwardly and brightly. The way young dogs jump when they finally believe joy won't be taken away. Watching him, I realized that for some dogs, the shelter is never the end. It is only the single door they were allowed to pass through on their way to the place that is truly theirs. This story isn't about the blindfold. It's about how we blindfold ourselves. Amber never had a real home, a puppyhood, or a family table to curl up under. The only stable point on his map was the shelter gate. Not because it was perfect, but because it was the only place someone had genuinely decided to fight for him. A yellow cream dog no one wanted. A small life chased from place to place. He found his hole beginning in the moment someone finally refused to let him disappear. There are thousands of dogs like him. The Malamute puppy left behind a store. The timid rescue hiding under a car. Trembling small bodies that don't know the world is allowed to be kind. Each one is a whole universe of fear, waiting, pain, and a kind of hope that doesn't require them to be brave. And this is why it matters to share the story. Every time it is shared, one more eye is turned toward a dog that needs to be seen. Every view is a chance for someone to choose the shelter instead of driving past it. More attention means more support for the volunteers, foster families, and no-kill rescues trying to hold back the tide of lives that deserve better. Amber's journey from a breath to a rebirth is the very reason no-kill rescues matter. Caring for a rescued puppy is more than love. It is responsibility. It is veterinary care. It is choosing to show up for those who were left behind. If you felt something for this dog, please make someone else feel it, too. Share his story. Help the next dog find a gate that leads to a life, not a loss.